Genesis chapter 24. Abraham sends the servant to his homeland to find a bride for Isaac. He did not want there to be a bride coming from the Canaanites and the people around Abraham and his family. He wanted someone that was in the family, and we talked about the importance of that last week. And you notice verse 10, then the servant took 10 camels from the camels of his master and set out with a variety of goods of the things of his master in his hand. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. So if you look at a map in the back of your Bible, if you look at a map up here, they traveled from this area right around here, which is the promised land, to the place of his birth where his family is. And so they traveled most likely across here, and what tells me that is because they got camels. They got 10 camels there in verse 10. This was a caravan going back. This area right here is the Arabian desert. It's not a good place to travel. But if you're in a hurry, if there's urgency, you'll go across here. Normally when people go to this area, they'll go up and go through this fertile region where the Euphrates and Tigris River are, because it's well watered. Camels are well suited for traveling in desert conditions. And so that tells me that they went across here to that homeland of Abraham to find a bride for his son Isaac. Look at verse 15. Remember, Abraham told him there were going to be certain things that happened to indicate that this is the one. This would be the one that is chosen to be the wife for Isaac. Verse 15, before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. Now, we should read verse 14 before we get there. It says, now may it be that the girl to whom I say, please let down your jar so that I may drink, and who answers, drink, and I will water your camels also, may she be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac, and by this I will know that you have shown loving kindness to my master. So here this unnamed servant is praying to God, and it starts with verse 12, and asking for success in his mission that he was about to undergo. And Abraham had already told him the angel of the Lord was going to be with him. So he's a very spiritual man. We're going to see this. We don't even know the name of this servant. He must have been a very much a trusted servant, because he is, as you read earlier in the chapter, is entrusted with so much there in as far as his household, Abraham's household. And so he is going as a representative of Abraham back to Abraham's homeland to find a wife for Isaac. And so verse 16 or verse 15 tells us when he had finished speaking these things, he's praying this prayer. He's already there. He's in that land. He's already made the journey to the homeland, to the area of Mesopotamia, the city of Nahor, verse 10 tells us. And he's there. And verse 16 says the girl, it says, well, let's read verse 15. Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with a jar on her shoulder. Now, this would be a common occurrence for women to do this in that society, to go get the water from the common well of the city. Verse 16, the girl was very beautiful, a virgin, and no man had relations with her. And she went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. It's very interesting, from the beginning of the Bible all the way to the end, that God ordained that the women and the men are to remain virgins until marriage. That's what God ordained. Then the world looks at that as silly and ridiculous and archaic, and you should, if you love someone, you should express it however you want. And the Bible makes it very clear, this is God's plan, that a woman and a man are to remain pure, and then they are to express their love to one another intimately in the covenant of marriage and not outside of it. And so that is the plan of God, you see, even in the book of beginnings here in Genesis. She was very beautiful. She was a virgin, verse 17. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, "Please let me drink a little water from your jar." And she said, "Drink, my lord." And she quickly lowered her jar to her hand and gave him a drink. So she is carrying a jar. Sometimes they would carry pitchers or jars to fill up. Sometimes it was animal skins that was sealed up so it could hold the water. Verse 19. Now when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will draw also for your camels until they have finished drinking." Remember, this is an indicator. This is the one. This is the one. Verse 20. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all the camels. Verse 21. Meanwhile, the man was gazing at her in silence to know whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. Verse 22. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel and 2 bracelets from his wrist weighing 10 shekels in gold. Verse 23. And said, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me. Is there room for us to lodge in your father's house?" So now the servant is asking Rebekah, "Who are you the daughter of?" Verse 24. She said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." Verse 25. Again she said to him, "We have plenty of both straw and feed and room to lodge in." And the man bowed low and worshipped the Lord. Again, you see the spiritual nature of this man. He's realizing that this is the one. This is the one. Now, we're not told how much time passed in his search. That's not indicated in chapter 24. But he is realizing that these are the indicators that were given to me to know whether this is going to be the one that the Lord wants me to take back to Abraham and to Isaac. And so at verse 26, the man bowed low and worshipped the Lord. Verse 27, he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his love and kindness and his truth towards my master. As for me, the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brother." So it was Abraham's brother's household that this girl, Rebekah, would be the one chosen from. Verse 28. The girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. Now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. And Laban ran outside to the man at the spring. Verse 30. When he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrist, and when he heard the words of Rebekah, his sister, saying, "This is what the man said to me," he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. Oftentimes a well would be a well that was furnished or supplied by a spring that was deep under the earth. So this is what you have. Verse 31, and he said, "Come in, blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside, since I have prepared the house and a place for the camels?" So he's inviting the man in, "Come and stay with us. We will furnish a resting place for your camels as well." Verse 32. So the man entered the house. Then Laban unloaded the camels, and he gave straw and feed to the camels and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Again, you see this common ancient custom. Jesus would do this when he celebrated the last Passover in John's gospel account. He would wash the disciples' feet. That was a common occurrence in ancient culture. It was a normal thing to have someone to wash your feet. Remove the sandal. The servant of the house would do it and wash the feet. It was something that was clean to do and also something that was soothing. It was a common occurrence in that culture. Verse 33, but when food was set before him to eat, he said, I will not eat until I have told my business. And he said to speak on. So now the servant is going to relate why he is there and why Rebekah is going to be chosen, why she is special. And he says, I'm not even going to eat until I tell you this. And so he is told to speak on, verse 34. So he said, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master so that he has become rich, and he has given him flocks and herds and silver and gold and servants and maids and camels and donkeys. So here again we are told that Abraham was a very, very rich, wealthy individual. He not only had a great livestock, which that's the way wealth was measured during the patriarchal age, but he also had silver and gold. So he was a very, very wealthy individual and very, very faithful. And so he is an example in the Bible of someone who is faithful on one hand to the Lord and wealthy on the other. It can happen. Now Jesus told about the dangers of wealth in his teaching. He said it's easier for the camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. Because too oftentimes the riches of the world, as we have studied the parable of the sower last Sunday morning, the riches of the world will choke out spiritual interest, spiritual things. But Abraham is an example of someone who was wealthy on one hand and spiritually minded and faithful to the Lord on the other. And so it can happen, and we should take heed to that because we are very wealthy people compared to the rest of the world. We should take heed to this example. Verse 36, he's continuing why he is giving the story why he is there, why he's made that journey. Now Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master in her old age, and he has given him all that he has. He is the one that was the chosen one. He would be the one to have the inheritance. Verse 37, my master made me swear, saying, you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I live, but you shall go to my father's house, to my relatives, and take a wife for my son. So you're not to choose a wife from the Canaanites. You're to go choose a wife for my son from my father's house. Again, the importance of marrying in the family. We see that spiritually speaking in the New Testament, that faithful Christians should marry other faithful Christians. And so here you have, of course, an arranged marriage. This is an arrangement. There was not going to be any courting or dating or anything of that nature. This was going to be arranged. And that's how it was in the culture of the ancient world and a lot of places today. Arranged marriages take place. And he says in verse 38, but you shall go to my father's house, that is Abraham's relatives, to my relatives and take a wife for my son. Verse 39. And I said to my master, suppose the woman does not follow me. And he said to me, the Lord before whom I have walked will send his angel. So in other words, this is going to be guided. This is going to be something that's not going to be haphazard. It's going to be guided. Will send his angel with you to make your journey successful. And you will take a wife for my son from my relatives and from my father's house. Well, was it revealed to Abraham all that was going to transpire as far as everything that was going to happen? Abraham at least knew that the Lord was going to send his angel with this servant. Did he know all the details beyond that? Don't know. Speculation as far as that goes. But he's saying the Lord will send his angel. There's no doubt in Abraham's mind that would happen. Verse 41. Then you will be, he says, then you will be free from my oath when you come to my relatives, and if they do not give her to you, you will be free from my oath. So the servant would be free from his obligation if the woman, by her own choice, chose not to go with him. In other words, he wasn't going to go there and force her to go back with him, go back to Abraham, go back to Isaac. There was not going to be any coercion. It was going to be a choice on her part. So you have here the choice that she had, and Abraham said to this servant, if she doesn't go back, you're free from the oath. You fulfilled your obligation. You're free from the oath that you have made to me. Verse 42, so I came today to the spring and said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now you will make my journey on which I go successful, behold, I am standing by the spring, and may it be that the maiden who comes out to draw, and to whom I say, please let me drink a little water from your jar, and she will say to me, drink, you drink, and I will draw for your camels also. Let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. So this individual, this one who will do this, who will give me drink and will draw water for my camels, let this be the one. Verse 45. Before I had finished speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder, and went down to the spring and drew, and I said to her, please let me drink. She quickly lowered the jar from her shoulder and said, drink, and I will water your camels also. So also I drank, and she watered the camels also. So this is the one, he is saying. Verse 47, then I asked her and said, whose daughter are you? And she said, the daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. And I put the ring on her nose and the bracelet on her wrist. This was the gifts. These were the gifts that were given. The ring in the nose and the bracelet on the wrist. Of course, that culture, and we might think that's strange to put a ring in the nose, but how is that any more strange than sticking a ring right here or a ring right here? I mean, that's what women do in our culture. They pierce their ears and they put rings here. So, I guess, you just look at different cultures and what they do, and that was the gift that was given there as to her being the one that was going to go back with him. Gave her these gifts. Verse 48, the servant then said, and I bowed low and worshipped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had guided me in the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Notice this, that God blessed his effort to do what was right. Aren't there lessons there? God blessed the effort of this servant in doing what was right. It was right for him to obey his master, to go and find a wife for Isaac. And with this humble attitude that he had, this prayerful attitude that the servant had, he wanted success. And he got success. And that's an example to us that if we're going to accomplish the Lord's will, we're going to have success. We got to put forth that effort to go and do it. But then we will have success if we humbly ask God to be with us and to fulfill these obligations. Verse 48, I bowed myself low and worshipped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who guided me in the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Verse 49. For now, if you are going to deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me. If not, let me know that I may turn to the right hand or to the left. In other words, is she going to go with me or not? So that I'll know what decision to make. That's what that phrase, turn to the right hand or left. So I'll know what decision to make is this going to take place? Is she going to go back with me? Verse 50, then Laban and Bethuel replied, the matter comes from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you, good or bad. Here is Rebekah before you. Take her and go and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. So Laban and Bethuel are saying, this is the Lord's work. We're not going to hinder it. We're not going to stand in its way. So here is Rebekah. She is available to go back with you. Verse 52, when Abraham's servants heard their words, he bowed himself to the ground before the Lord. Again, see that bowing himself to the ground, that humility this individual had. Verse 53, the servant brought out articles of silver and articles of gold, garments, and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave precious things to her brother and to her mother. So this would be almost like gifts, a dowry. In the arranged marriage, you would give gifts to the one who, to the family of the bride that was to be. And so it was something to that nature there to give these gifts. Verse 54, then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night. Then they arose in the morning, and he said, send me away to my master. But her brother and her mother said, let the girl stay with us a few days, say 10, afterwards she may go. Verse 56, he said to them, do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master. And they said, we will call the girl and consult her wishes. Why did they want her to spend a few days, maybe 10 days? Maybe they wanted to know what her wishes were. Maybe she was going to make a big decision. She was about to leave that area and go far off, and they possibly would never see her again. So there could be a lot of speculation as to why. The servant is anxious to get back to Abraham. But they're saying, let this girl stay with us a few days, and about 10 afterwards she may go. Verse 58, then they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will go. So she would go with him. Verse 59. Thus they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse with Abraham's servant and his men. Verse 60. They blessed Rebekah and said to her, may you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them. So they're pronouncing a blessing upon Rebekah, that she may become thousands of 10,000s, and of course, talking about multiplying. That she will have children and have many descendants. And may these descendants, verse 60, possess the gates of those who hate them. If you possess the gate of a city, you control that city. Remember we talked about how the cities of the ancient world would be walled. And they'd have that protection of the wall around them. And the gate there was sometimes an area where judgment was pronounced. Sometimes a business transaction went on there. A trade and commerce would go on there in the gate. And if you controlled the gate of the city, you controlled that gate because you controlled who went in and went out. And so the blessing there upon Rebekah is that her descendants may control the gate of the city of those who would hate them. In other words, they would conquer their enemies. That's another way of saying it. Verse 61, then Rebekah arose with her maidens, and they mounted the camels and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and departed. Verse 62, remember I said this was a long chapter, longest chapter in the book of Genesis. Verse 62, now Isaac had come from going to Beer-lahai-roi, for he was living in Negev. Verse 63, and Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward the evening, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming. So they made that long journey back to where Abraham and Isaac lived, and he saw the caravan of camels coming. And it says in verse 64, Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. Verse 65, she said to her servant, who is that man walking in the field to meet us? And the servant said, he is my master. Then she took her veil and covered herself. Very interesting. Again, you have an insight into their culture. She covered herself with the veil when she found out that this was going to be the one that she would be marrying. Covered herself. Verse 66. The servant told Isaac all the things that had been done. Then Isaac brought her into her mother's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Remember, we talked about Sarah's death. Isaac, of course, was mourning that death. But now Rebekah was going to become his wife. And from some of the things that I read, the covering of the face was an indication that this woman, in some cultures, indicated that this woman was unmarried. Cover the face. Sometimes in Muslim societies today, there's really not a reason. You cover from head to toe, and all that you see is the eyes in the extreme Muslim countries, so that they in public would not see any part of them. Yes? Well, I'm not going to go there. I think I'll leave that alone. But Rebekah's described here as being beautiful in the chapter. She's described as being beautiful. So here you have her covering her face, and you see the culture and how it is different in different places. And sometimes that culture is even evident in today's world, where people will wear these veils in public. The Muslim women will have to wear veils in public. And some people who do missionary work over in those countries where Islam is very strong, the women would have to wear that burqa. That's what it's called, a burqa, to cover their face in public as they go out. And so it's part of that ancient culture that they're still holding on to, and the extremist Muslims want to impose on the rest of the world. And so that's why they do their terrorist acts, and they want to spread Islam all over the planet. So you women would have to wear a veil and a burqa every time you stepped outside the door. That's what they wish. Any question or comment about chapter 24? It's very interesting that you don't see anything about a marriage ceremony. Verse 67, it says, Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. Of course, this would be like a wedding chamber. They would have made it into a wedding chamber. And took Rebekah, and she became his wife. Of course, there would have been some sort of ceremony. But ceremonies are different from culture to culture. There is in every culture some sort of a transition, a ceremony, a making of a covenant between a man and a woman. You think of the most primitive societies you can see on television, where they still live in huts and they still hunt with primitive weapons. There is a ceremony. There is a transition from being single and unmarried to entering into a covenant of marriage. And that's exactly what you have here, even though the details are not given in the latter part of the chapter. Verses 67, verse 67, the last verse of the chapter. So you have them married. chapter 25, verse 1, very quickly. We will go into chapter 25. Now Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. This is the wife of Abraham years after Sarah had passed away. And he has married again. Verse 2. It's interesting that if chapter 25 and verse 1 is talking about a chronology after what happened in chapter 24. In other words, it happened, the events in sequence. Then after he is comforted in seeing Isaac marrying Rebekah, then Abraham marries someone. Abraham marries a woman by the name of Keturah, if that is happening in sequence or one after the other. Verse 2, and she bore him Zimran and Jokshan and Midian and Ishbak and Shuhan. Verse 3, Jokshan became the father of Sheba and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were the Ashurim, the Litshum, and the Lemim. Verse 4, the sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, and Ebed, and Edel. All these were the sons of Keturah. So all of these listings here in verses 2 through 4 are the further children of Abraham. These are the other children of Abraham that are sometimes not as well known as Isaac and Ishmael. So these are the ones that he had with Keturah, his wife. Verse 5, now Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, passing the blessing on to Isaac. Even though Ishmael was the firstborn, but Ishmael was the firstborn through the handmaiden Hagar, he was not to be that promised seed. He was not to be the promised seed, even though he was the firstborn to Abraham. Isaac would be the one to inherit all these things. Verse 6, but to the sons of his concubines Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the land of the east. Verse 7, these are all the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 175 years. So we're coming to now the end of Abraham's life. Abraham breathed his last and died a ripe old age, an old man, full of years, some translations might say. Others say satisfied with life. And he was gathered to his people. Now I want you to keep that phrase in mind. He was gathered to his people. Verse 8 says, Abraham breathed his last and died. His physical body died. He was a ripe old man and a man that was full of years. The translations that have full of years, the of years may be in italics. Or the ones that have satisfied, the with life is in italics. That indicates that was not in the original Hebrew text. And that was supplied by the translator to kind of help bring out what maybe what is said in the original Hebrew, bring it over into the English a little bit better. Full of years and satisfied with life, it could just stop at the word satisfied or full. And the reason why that's important is he was an old man. He died, he breathed his last, and he was a man that was full or satisfied. Those extra words might be more confusing than anything, because if he died accomplishing God's will, he was satisfied. He was full. In other words, it's not indicating full of years as much as having fulfilled his purpose. Having fulfilled his reason for living. serving the one true God. And so he accomplished God's will. He became faithful to God, and he was one who died satisfied or full. And he was gathered to his people. Now, keep that phrase in mind as we look at verse 9. Then his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, and the sons of Zoar, the sons of Zoar, the Hittite, facing Mamre. Verse 10, this was the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried with Sarah his wife. Now, let's go ahead and read verse 11. It came about after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived in Beer Lahai. Now notice, back up at verse 8, he was gathered to his people. But also notice verse 9 and 10. Abraham was buried where? Machpelah, the cave of Machpelah. He was buried in a purchased cave. Who was already there? Whose body was already there? Sarah's. Why did he have to purchase it? He had no land of his own. So he had to purchase this land that had this cave in it to bury her there. Now you notice the phrase there in verse 8, he was gathered to his people. Some believe, well, he was buried in a burial place where his ancestors were buried. No. He was not buried in his ancestral home. His ancestral home is Ur of the Chaldees, way over in Mesopotamia. So the phrase or the expression there, he was gathered to his people, has a spiritual significance. Abraham died and was gathered to his people in the spiritual realm. He wasn't buried at his home burial plot, so to speak, the family burial plot back in Ur. He was gathered to his people is a phrase, an expression. You find this all throughout the Old Testament that indicates he went to those who had died before him. He went to those who had died before him, his people, spiritually speaking. And in fact, Jesus talks about this in Luke chapter 16 when he talks about the rich man and Lazarus. Lazarus, the poor beggar, when he died, angels took him where? Took him where? Abraham's bosom in paradise. He was taken to paradise. He was gathered to his people. That phrase there has a spiritual significance, and some have mistakenly said, well, this means he was buried with his ancestors. No, he wasn't buried with his ancestors. He was buried way far off from where his ancestors lived and were buried. And dying there in the promised land, he was a stranger for all practical purposes. The only plot of land he owned was his wife's burial place, tomb, where the cave is there at Machpelah. And so when he died, he breathed his last, his physical body died, but his spirit was gathered with his people. He went to paradise. And he is set forth as a great man of faith that really shows what true faith is, as we have said before. A man that hears God's words and obeys them and does what God says no matter what. And that's what he did all of his life for the most part, and he died in that condition. Now next week, as far as the arrangement of things, and I'll bring this up in the devotional, Jim Nash is supposed to be the guest speaker. He's going to speak Sunday morning, Sunday night, and next Wednesday night. But he lives in the Houston area. He might have to go back home and see how much damage was done to his house. So he might have to leave before Wednesday night. So next week we'll just have the normal singing. Either way, we'll probably just won't have classes like normal on the last Wednesday night of this month. So it'll either be singing night next Wednesday night, or Jim Nash will speak to us.